So a lot of what we do as far as cyber hygiene is done to protect ourselves, like choosing good passwords, using a password manager, using multi-factor authentication, running antivirus, blocking malicious advertisements, locking your credit report, endpoint monitoring. This is something that larger organizations are going to do in-house, or smaller organizations they're going to outsource. So if you're a company, if you're a government, if you're a small business, if you're a major corporation, you want to know what's happening on your computer network, what's happening on all the devices on your network. If somebody gets malware, you want to know about it and you want to be able to detect it and stop it. So sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, you might have a dedicated security operations center where people are looking at alerts and looking at what's happening on all the computers 24/7 to stop bad stuff before it happens or limit the damage of bad stuff happening. So one of the tools, one of the companies who creates this kind of software is called CrowdStrike. And so they made some news fairly recently, July 19th, 2024. They pushed out an update. So kind of like antivirus. Periodically, your antivirus is going to go out to the internet, download all the latest virus signatures to detect the new and emerging threats, because new viruses are always appearing on the market. So CrowdStrike, they had noticed, because they monitor a lot of systems. It's a huge company. Millions of customers run CrowdStrike software. Well, their software is on millions of computers, let's say. So CrowdStrike became aware of a threat, some C2 software, command and control. So they developed a procedure to detect this software, and they pushed out an update. Unfortunately, that update crashed people's computers. Now I'm showing you my computer. I have running in the background, I've got the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor. So this sensor is running on my computer in the background. Anytime my computer's running, the CrowdStrike Falcon sensor is running. So that sensor is looking at all the programs running on my computer. It's snooping on basically everything I'm doing. As a work device, my employer has the right to know exactly what I'm doing on this work computer. They can inspect all my network traffic. They can see what websites I'm viewing. They can know just about anything they want about what's happening on this computer. So this Falcon sensor is collecting some of that data. It's not like recording my keystrokes, not down to that level, but it's looking at a fairly deep level, what's happening on my computer, looking for suspicious activity. So we see CrowdStrike showing up a few places here. Now, the July 19th, around on my computer, I saw the file. It was about 12:19 in the morning. CrowdStrike, the software in the background, automatically went out to the internet, pulled down the latest, they call them channel files. I'm looking at this C Windows System 32 drivers CrowdStrike folder. This is where CrowdStrike downloads those channel files. You can kind of think about these like the virus definitions, maybe a little bit more complex than that. Detection routines, all that kind of good stuff. Unfortunately, this software got installed, and when the CrowdStrike Falcon loaded that file, it crashed the computer. So why would it crash the computer? Well, software, very broadly speaking, can run in one of two modes. Kernel mode, that's like your operating system. That's the lowest mode, bedrock. Your operating system has a kernel. Whether you're running a Mac, Windows, or Linux, you've got a kernel. The stuff in the kernel can directly access the hardware. Write to your hard drive, read from your hard drive, play music, do all of that stuff. Your operating system can also launch new programs or stop programs, all the stuff to make your computer work. Lots of that stuff happens in the kernel. Now, in user mode, that's where you're running like Microsoft Word or Notepad or your web browser, the regular applications with the graphical user interface that you can see. And those programs do not have direct access to the hardware. If you need to save a file, your user application will essentially talk to the kernel and say, please save this file for me. The CrowdStrike Falcon service installs some code in the kernel. It runs in kernel mode. That means it has very low level access to your system. Now, for antivirus, for security monitoring software, this can be necessary because if CrowdStrike is going to monitor all the applications running on your computer, it needs to have legitimate access to all of that information, and it just can't do that if it's running fully in user mode. So Microsoft was actually forced to make this kind of scanning possible. So they modified Windows to allow companies like CrowdStrike to build these security modules that integrated into the kernel. CrowdStrike released a bad update, crashed Windows computers. It wasn't really a bug in Windows. Windows wasn't really at fault. It was CrowdStrike's fault. But some people are criticizing Microsoft for allowing companies like CrowdStrike to embed themselves in the system that way. But really, you can blame the European Union because they forced Microsoft to do it. So these kind of tools, they go by a bunch of different names. Endpoint detection and response. So an endpoint is like my computer, my laptop is an endpoint. So it's being monitored by Falcon. The detection, it can detect malware and respond. It can quarantine that malware, delete files, do all of that good stuff. There's extended detection and response, which adds other data sources. So network traffic, what's happening not just on my machine, but like on our organization's network. Managed detection and response, MDR. This is endpoint detection and response, but instead of doing it in-house, like here we've got a central server in our company's data center where our security operations center team is taking care of everything. With managed detection and response, we're saying, you know what? We're going to monitor all of our endpoints, but we're not going to monitor all this stuff in-house. Instead, we're going to send all of that monitoring data to the cloud, and we're going to let a third party help us out. So if you're a government and you've got like 3 IT employees who are already overworked and they've got too much on their plate, they can't also do security operations center work. So a lot of companies today are outsourcing the monitoring of their system to third parties, or at least storing a lot of that data in the cloud so they can get up and running with this software quickly. It eases the administrative burden. So the tons of industries were interrupted when CrowdStrike pushed out this bad update. So I'm going to scroll down and show you. Here we have an example of the blue screen of death, BSOD. That's common on Windows. Every operating system, they've got their own color screen of death. Windows, it's blue. It's been blue for many, many years. Many people woke up the morning of July 19th in the United States to the blue screen of death. Personally, on my company issued laptop, yes, I had the blue screen of death. Tried to restart my computer, computer would not restart. A bad update got pushed out. So the fix was not terribly complicated, but it had to be done manually. So usually with an update, if there's a bad update, you can, the company might retract a bad update, push out a better update that fixes the problem with the previous update. As long as you can go out and grab that update, your computer will generally be fine. In this case, though, the bad update crashed people's computers so that they could not go out and get that update. So during the boot process, some CrowdStrike put out a notice that, hey, if your computer, while it's booting, it will check for updates. If your computer happens to grab the latest update, your computer will be fixed. But if your network connection is just a little bit too slow, or your network doesn't come up really fast, your computer might not get that update simply by rebooting. So they actually recommended, I read some articles that said reboot up to 15 times to make your computer work. Nobody wants to do that. So if you're an IT company, or if you're in the IT department of a big company, you've got tens of thousands of desktops, and you want to tell people, yeah, we're going to reboot your computer 15 times, that's a pain. Otherwise, you can boot into safe mode. So that's what I did. You just hold down the power button at a strategic time during the boot process, and your computer will boot into safe mode. I went into this folder, C, Windows System 32, drivers CrowdStrike. I found the file that CrowdStrike said, yeah, that's the bad one. I deleted that file, rebooted my computer again. This time I did not boot into safe mode. I booted regularly and my computer came up just fine. So I was able to fix my computer, just in a couple of minutes. For me, it wasn't a big deal, but I don't want the average, person in marketing or accounting, someone who has not had training in booting into safe mode and deleting files from your C Windows System 32 directory. I don't want the average person doing that, because if they do that, there's a decent chance they're going to delete the wrong stuff and could potentially cause problems. So it's a good example of, updates. A lot of people criticize CrowdStrike, I think correctly, for not properly testing these updates that they pushed out. Everything got pushed out all at once. So maybe CrowdStrike could have done their change management differently, so that when they have one of these updates, maybe they don't deploy it to the entire world. Maybe they deploy it to a subset of customers at first. It's tough, because if you're an IT administrator and you want to protect your company, CrowdStrike or any antivirus company, they're going to be sending you updates all the time. Can you just install those updates and expect everything to work? Or do you have to vet every single update that they're sending you? Really a tricky problem. So there's going to be a lot of fallout about this. People are going to be talking about this for years. It's very relevant. CrowdStrike got bit, but it could have, easily been another security company that got bit. So we saw major disruptions in air travel, lots of hotels. They couldn't book guests. They're running credit cards manually. It was just a nightmare scenario for a lot of people. It's somewhat ironic that the tool that people were installing to protect their networks ended up probably being the single factor that caused the most disruption so far this year, at least. So time will tell. Should companies run this kind of software that integrates really tightly with the operating system and has so much visibility into their computers? The short answer, if you're the Chief Information Security Officer, short answer is, yeah, you just have to. It's a requirement. It's to pass audits and to show that you're doing everything right. You have to be running this software. So even though you're introducing potentially another vulnerability with this software with such low-level, tight access to your operating system, the alternatives to run without it, and you're potentially opening yourself up to even bigger problems. So it's an interesting problem. I'd encourage you, check out Dave Plummer's video. Dave Plummer, he gives an excellent overview of the CrowdStrike fiasco. He worked for Microsoft. He helped write several of the Windows operating systems, so he really knows what he's talking about. He is, just as a quick plug, as an aside, he also talks about managing his career in other videos. He talks about managing his career in information technology, especially from the perspective of somebody who's slightly neurodivergent. So he's a good person to follow on YouTube. All right, so endpoint detection and response. Do we need it? Yeah. Sadly, we do. If you're in charge of security or organization, we've got to have it. But we should have backup plans in case that those systems fail or any of our systems fail. So it's a tough situation to be in, but that's kind of the state of cybersecurity. It's job security because there's always new and exciting things happening.